Welcome and bienvenidos one and all. Thank you very much for joining us today, whatever time zone you're in, for this ALABC webinar focused on identifying the pathway to recovery post-COVID-19. My name is Jose Blanco. For those of you that are not familiar with the ALABC, the Business Council has been operating for over 30 years and is committed to helping connect Australian business with business throughout all of Latin America, and today's event is specifically focused on the Chilean market. Can I just do a few housekeeping matters for everyone's benefit? First of all, the demand has been very, very great. So given that the participation is limited to 100, I'm told that it's done on a first come basis. So I hope you're in. Secondly, throughout the session, the participants will not be able to be seen or heard. Any questions that you may have for any of the panelists should be written in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will have the Q&A session at the end of the various presentations. Should you lose connection at any time during the webinar, please re-enter using the same link that you used to join on this occasion. And finally, the webinar is going to be recorded and will be made available to you through the ALABC webpage at a later date. So no need to take copious notes if that's what you'd like to do. So without further ado, I'd like to now pass to introducing the various speakers that have been assembled by the Business Council for today's event. First of all, Rodrigo Yáñez, the Vice Minister of International Economics and Trade for Chile. Ian Frederick, the Head of Investment Promotion at InvestChile. His Excellency, Todd Mercer, Australia's Ambassador to Chile. His Excellency, Patricio Powell, Chile's Ambassador to Australia. Ben White, Operations Manager for the Pacific at GHD. Gabrielle Hall, Austrade Trade Commissioner based in Santiago. So you can see there that we have a quality panel, and we'll be able to have quite a few different perspectives on the topic at hand. So having said that, if I could now call upon Rodrigo Yáñez to make his introductory presentation. Over to you, Vice Minister.
Thank you very much. I will share briefly my presentation, which is also quite brief. So, well, thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. Just okay, there it should be on the screens, if you could.
Yep.
Okay. So, well, first of all, for me, it's very important to be able to share what we're doing and how also trade policy is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and this Vice Ministry being used also to face this crisis and also the post-pandemic situation. In that sense, what I would like to share is what our trade looked like before. And in that sense, we can see that, of course, the country, and you probably will know, has a very extensive network of FTA, the strongest in the world, according to the OECD. And that accounts for 29 different free trade agreements. The last is being discussed actually at the Congress today, which approved the FTA with Brazil. Only today. So we expect to make that number grow larger. And we saw last year closing with a rate of exports that showed a decrease over the last year, but that nevertheless showed a very intense use of our FTA network. With 92% of our exports being, did something wrong here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so basically what I want to share with you is the outlook of our trade last year with a very intense use of our FTA network and how we also expect to expand the export of services, which accounted $1.2 billion the last year, and also with main figures that you will see in the next slide. 69.6 billion of exports and 62% of drop in lower export value of mining product is explained. I mean, of the overall drop, 62% is explained because of the drop in commodity prices. And you can see also that exports different from copper represented 52% of the total value in the country, with nevertheless several sectors explaining a very important increase, a historical also figure in agricultural, forestry, and fishery, especially when we talk about cherries, plums, avocados, and pears. And now what we've been doing from the Vice Ministry is to work around these 6 axes. The first is to further implement and modernize our existing FTA network to diversify our export offer, but also our destinations in terms of markets. We've seen that as a very important task, I mean, to use the word of diversification as strong as ever, given the trade tensions between China and the US. Those two are our top and second trading partners, and that accounted for in a great manner to the decrease in our exports the last year. So we will be strengthening our presence in emerging markets where we are not present today or where we want to grow, and also to promote national participation in international fora, like namely the WTO. These discussions around the Ottawa Group. Also Australia participates. Our work leading, for instance, the initiative on trade facilitation for development and negotiation that we expect to launch in the context of the WTO, thinking in the MC12, and also other initiatives which bet on the multilateral trading system to also face this crisis. We have joined a political statement with Australia and other countries to keep the supply chains open, especially when we talk about the products that are related to face this crisis, like medical supplies. But also, and this is not unique to Chile, to work very closely with our civil society to further explain the benefits of trade, of this FTA network, and also what flavor it has for citizens on a daily basis, to further explain their connection with trade, which accounts for 57% of our GDP. And that is a reality that Chileans really do not, of which they do not are fully aware. So we wish to work on that by also fostering our domestic and external coordination. Here you can see the composition of our exports in terms of markets, excluding copper, over time. You can see how big of deal the Asia Pacific has turned out for Chile over these past years. And we believe that it will remain so. While we keep modernizing our association agreement with the EU, with EFTA, and other countries that do not belong to the Asia Pacific Basin, it's clear that our future in terms of trade and development and also investment will be closely related to the Asia Pacific region. So that is why also we need to go to a second wave of diversification and opening of markets. And those are the areas that we keep on working and where we have a very clear agenda, which is sometimes short-term and in other areas more medium and long-term. In the case of India, we have launched a negotiation to expand our PTA. We were facing the second round of negotiations in Delhi in late March. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule that given the COVID-19 crisis, but we look to resume it over the next few weeks. Probably through this via video conference, virtually meeting our teams of negotiators. But it's extremely important for us when we think of our expanding our presence in the Indo-Pacific region. But also there's ASEAN, where the last agreement with Indonesia was the CHEPA agreement, that now we are fully implementing. And we keep on advancing new initiatives to further expand our presence and engagement, and not only from the trade perspective, but also from the political and cooperation one with ASEAN. With the Eurasian Economic Union, where we expect to kick off negotiations once the bloc decides their next trading partners to start negotiations with. The north of Africa, in particular Morocco and Egypt as waypoints to Africa, but also the Gulf countries where the participation in the Expo 2020 is also one good example of that bet. And certainly the Pacific Alliance, where we negotiate the incorporation of associated members, where also Australia is participating along with New Zealand, with Canada and Singapore. APEC, of course, is something always relevant in the multilateral forum. We just hosted the APEC year. Unfortunately, we were not able to hold to hold the summit of the Leaders Week here in Santiago, but we were able to advance the agenda, our priorities, and certainly it will remain as the prime integration forum for us in the Asia Pacific. In the context of the Asia Pacific, Australia is a very important like-minded country. Those are a couple of few figures of our relation, but certainly Australia, given the high quality partner that it is, for us it's also a very key stakeholder when approaching the Asia Pacific and ASEAN. We keep also looking for the support of, we constantly keep looking for the support of our Australian friends when launching new initiatives in ASEAN or in the Asia Pacific region. Now Australia has become a very important waypoint for us to Asia. When thinking in supply chains, pretty much all of our flights to China today to bring medical supplies and also Chilean citizens stranded there go through either Australia or New Zealand. So it has turned out to be very strategic and critical to keep those trade lines open. And Australia is also, like I said, a member of this initiative that we launched to facilitate and secure a safe flow of goods and people through our countries in the context of this pandemic. Now, what impact has this had on our trade? We have seen a decrease of our trade balance in nearly 8%, with exports affected in nearly to a 4%, and imports in the 12%. This is the comparison between the first Q of the 2 years, and of course for us what's most relevant is the impact of this pandemic in the more general and broader economic effect in the global economy, the recession that is starting to become a reality in many countries, and therefore the reduction in world trade flows, which according to the WTO could decline up to 32% this year. So that is very concerning for us. We have not seen a blockage of our trade. Our ports, our customs are working properly, and we have not seen many markets closed given this pandemic, but certainly the disruption of the pandemic has affected and has created a demand shock, a change in consumers' patterns. So we are readjusting our agenda towards a much more e-commerce, different retail, not presence retail. And we are worried about the impact that the economic situation will have overall in trade. So the forecast according to our central bank for exports or imports are there. And you can see that this also will affect the estimations of 1.5 to 2% decrease or negative increase of our GDP this year. Others expect it to fall even more, but trade as being as relevant as it is in our GDP certainly will get affected and will have an impact in our growth. So from this Vice Ministry, we are acting as an articulator for trade facilitation, monitoring international markets through the network of our Pro-Chile offices in 56 different countries. We also, I wish to comment that we have turned Pro-Chile also into, given this situation where their usual activities are affected, trade fairs, networking, presence networking between buyers and exporters. Now we are also relying on them to keep a very active search of medical supplies for our Ministry of Health. And so many of the items and the search for new suppliers, safe suppliers, etc., is being channeled by Pro-Chile, and we've been able to keep pretty much, I would say, an air link between Chile and Asia that goes through Australia and New Zealand, and where the work of Pro-Chile is extremely relevant. I mentioned already the political statement that we've made with a handful of like-minded countries around trade. We will be joining also the recently launched initiative between South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada to also keep supply chains open and resolve the barriers that we might face when dealing with trade in the context of this crisis, but also participate in other initiatives in the context of the WTO. For us, this is a time where we should not think on increasing protectionism, quite the opposite. Certainly the temptation is pretty high among some of our politicians. There is a lot of fear in the context of this crisis, but we're being very vocal about using our trade policy as a tool to face this pandemic, and that entails a lot of international multilateral cooperation, coordination, and from this Vice Ministry is what we are doing. We have adopted a multi-sectorial public-private coordination. We have triggered regional trade working groups. And also we have summoned the National Committee on Trade Facilitation, which we chair in compliance with the also trade facilitation WTO agreement, and we're keeping a very active role in trade facilitation with also the rest of the agencies that have play a very important role there. So in that sense, we are activating the use of electronic trade certificates, both in export and import. So we have been able to get the approval of our trading partners to accept those, while speeding up the implementation of the e-single window for trade operations, the use of e-sign for operations, and also when it comes to sanitary and phytosanitary certifications, to also use the electronic channel much more way more often. We're doing that with Brazil, with Argentina, with China more recently, with the EU, etc. So basically, what we did is to articulate nationwide system where they can reply, forward their problems, their situations. All of the vice ministries and agencies involved in trade operations respond. We have set a single channel where you can see that email there to raise these situations, while at the same time keeping a very active eye through our trade promotion agencies all over the world when it comes to face trade barriers, so that we can respond swiftly to them. So that is pretty much what I wanted to share. In terms of trade, I want to stress how relevant this situation will be. This is a sanitary situation that has meant also a very robust reaction from the country with multi-billion US dollar packages, economic packages to support SMEs, to support independent workers, to support families over this period of time. We are not using a nationwide or broad policy for lockdowns. Those are selective and progressive, and that's what we are seeing now here in the city of Santiago, where nearly half of the Santiago metropolitan region districts are, as of today, starting a lockdown, given an increase in the numbers of contagions. But nevertheless, today we are a similar number of active cases vis-a-vis recovered cases. The health system has not been surpassed in its capacity by this situation, and the government is being very actively looking to respond with several different packages of support that has been being approved by the Congress. And also you have to bear in mind that this situation comes right after the social crisis that we faced in October, which also had a very important financial impact in terms of some more debt and the resource to international savings and reserves. But the country has been able to respond, institutionally speaking, to these two crises through the ways of decades of stable and responsible fiscal policies, and also because of being an open country for trade and investment, which will remain so. And you can see that with the proof today that even despite of the pandemic, despite of the social crisis, the Congress has approved with a very important majority an agreement with a very important trading partner that will make a very important difference in our trade, which in this case is Brazil. So we'll keep on working through the trade policy to address this situation, both in the sanitary side of this crisis, but also in terms of the economic crisis. So we will keep with a very active trade policy agenda, not just in the Congress, but also when it comes to new negotiations. We have, like I mentioned, negotiations open with the EU, with EFTA, with South Korea. We've just finished with Ecuador. We've just finished also a digital economy partnership agreement, which is a first of its kind with New Zealand and Singapore, which we expect to digitally sign pretty soon. And we will certainly keep advancing in the negotiations with emerging countries like, or emerging markets for us, like the India negotiation. For us, it's very important to convey the message that Australia is a like-minded and key strategic partner when it comes to the Asia-Pacific strategy of my country, and we expect to expand, the avenues of cooperation between Chile and Australia, thinking in the future. Thank you very much for your time and for the chance to share with you, and I'll be happy to participate in the Q&A next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Our next panelist is Frederick, and if I could just remind all subsequent panelists of our desire to have time for the Q&A, so if you could please do your best to keep to the allotted time. So without further ado, Frederick, Head of Investment Promotion at InvestChile. Over to you, Ian.
Vice Minister Rodrigo Yáñez, Ambassador Powell, Ambassador Todd, Mercer, welcome back again to Chile. And trade commissioners, and of course all guests connected today. Many thanks to ALABC for inviting InvestChile to participate in this encounter. I will cover three quick topics on this presentation. Some ideas on how FDI has been impacted by the crisis. Second, a snapshot of some sectors that seem to be doing well in Chile in this context. And lastly, how InvestChile can help investors during this year. Next slide, please. The impact to foreign investment has been really hard. The United Nations and the OECD just did a revision on global FDI, estimating a drop by 30 to 40% in the next 12 months, which means that $500 billion are not flowing anywhere in these times. What makes it more complex today is that it is affecting developing countries as well as developed economies at the same time. This is very unusual. So it's not going to be easy to redirect our efforts to attract FDI from countries or regions that we think could be less impacted. You have to know that for Latin America, the first source of financing is FDI, and the majority comes from countries like United States, China, and Europe. And this has happened overnight. It has been an immediate shock to the FDI flows. Usually FDI flows follow the fluctuations of GDP trends, but with certain delay, a couple of quarters to say. It's probable that we won't see a fast recovery on the global FDI flows. We understand that companies will need first to recover ongoing business and a healthy financial position, and then they might be planning again to expand. So what we're doing at InvestChile today is that we're putting special attention to assist the foreign investors that already are here in the country, to help them today with the crisis and tomorrow to help them resume to take their investments here. It's called aftercare for us. We see that the banking and the financing industry have raised their standards. So this might be causing additional delays to reactivate investment flows in the future. In terms of the type of investments, some greenfields for now probably will only be delayed as they have long gestation periods. But the question here is, and probably everyone is asking themselves, when are the economies really going to recover? Because some of these projects could re-engage in Q4, for example. But if we have a global recession period afterwards, this might be postponed to even the second semester of next year. In terms of M&A, we just listened to the announcement of announced cross-border transactions worldwide. This year will drop by about 70%, which is really amazing. All this being said, of course, we know that some sectors are having greater impact than others, and some countries more than others. Interestingly, just yesterday in Chile, it was announced the acquisition of a Chilean supermarket chain by a Colombian retailer. We believe that there are two factors, key factors that we think that countries will make the difference for countries, how they will come out from the COVID in terms of foreign investment. First, the fundamentals that they have or don't have as an attractive destiny for foreign investment. And let me say that Chile has been great for decades in this regard. And second, the type of measures that governments are taking during these times. So let's see next slide. I'll talk about it. Before this crisis, many countries, we know that already had mechanisms to protect sensitive assets or strategic sectors from foreign acquisitions. During this crisis, we see that some countries have established these mechanisms and others have increased them. For example, Spain that is putting more sectors under scrutiny, or Italy and France that their governments are taking ownership on some assets, key assets like airline companies and automobile. So these are just examples, but on the other side, we see that some countries are taking measures to promote investment. Some have liberalized or privatized their industries, like the natural gas in Greece or coal mining in India. Others have implemented their fiscal incentives, or they have adopted policies to simplify the investment processes in their countries. In Chile, well, under this crisis or even other crises before, Chile has remained constantly open to foreign investment. We have a regime that is based on the free flow of capitals in and out with no restrictions. It's based on the non-discrimination principle. We treat all investors as equally. In many of our key sectors, we see that they are fully driven by international players, like financial, health, mining, energy. So far, we have not implemented protectionist measures, and even more, we just saw that our customs service announced a series of measures to facilitate exports with digital procedures or less documentation, and also to facilitate imports, for example, in the case of medical devices. So in 2 words, Chile remains open for foreign investment, and it also reinforces a position as a global trading platform. Next slide, please. Here we can see some forecasts for Chile made by the central bank for this year. The GDP is estimated to decrease in this range. Like our vice minister was telling us, we believe that exports will be performing well as a key to our economy, but that they have a strong platform, especially a whole network of international treaties. And it's also interesting to mention that even after all the emergency economic packages that Chile is implementing, our financial fundamentals are still looking quite reasonable or good. In the next slide, I wanted to show a little bit of the history of foreign investment and the flows in Chile. We've been doing quite well in the last couple of years. In 2018, we had a 28% growth. And in 2019, it was even better with a 63% growth. It was much higher than the average of Latin America, which was 16%, or the 0% of some developing economies. During January, February of this year, we also had some very good inflows into Chile. But we will have to wait, and we will see soon what is the immediate impact, the real impact of inflows in our country. So now I would like to share with you some of the sectors where we believe that we're showing a good behavior in Chile. In the next slide, we wanted to capture some of them and the potential opportunities there might be there. As you know, the mining industry represents about 10% of our GDP. And although this crisis has pressured the copper prices down, generally speaking, we see that the large projects have not reported delays in their development so far. The industry just these days have been announcing that the production is in line with last year and that they don't see major impacts from this crisis so far. We have a strong pipeline of gold projects for a value of around $2 billion worth, and gold is just going up. So this is a good portfolio of projects to have. So given the Australian renowned capabilities on the METS sector, we can tell you that they can count on this big economic sector of Chile, which seems to be up and running, we could say. In the next slide, we can see a little bit of the fintech industry and the startup sector, which is, we believe it's doing well. Several Chilean fintechs have scaled up to Mexican and Colombian markets. Our fintech law now in Congress has very interesting elements to make this as a very attractive market for new players looking to have access to the region. That's a bit of the idea behind that law. The venture capital and the startups sector is emerging strongly, ideally to become a regional hub. This sector has strong fundamentals. It has a good deal flow of startups scaling up to larger markets. It has an excellent business environment. We have a good regulation. We have tax incentives, a good co-funding scheme from government. It has been crucial for the success of this industry, and a digitalized market. So we see very important international funds arriving, even these days, to co-fund with local firms portfolios of companies and projects across Latin America. The Association of Venture Capital in Chile has mapped out and the industry, and they have a portfolio of about 200 startups that they think are ready for investors that would like to come and enter the market through equities or acquisitions. The next slide, we wanted to tell a bit of how Chile is becoming a hub for data centers and digital infrastructure in Latin America. We have an amazing pipeline of projects, so of around $2 billion. They are all going ahead. We've been talking with our clients in this industry. It is a very attractive market given the market that is in Latin America for clouding services and colocation. It's growing at a rate of 20-25% per year, and probably in times like this even more. We have built a strong digital ecosystem here in Chile that is attracting all sorts of companies now around this. Co-location companies, clouding services, infrastructure as a service, service as a service. So all of them are looking in Chile a place to serve from here the rest of Latin America and even the United States. We have a great connectivity across the region and to other regions with some direct fiber cable optics to United States. And we believe that in these times, there will be even more companies moving in and investing in here. In second point is the fiber optics. We have also a very important macro project that will increase our international interconnectivity. It's called the Trans-Pacific Fiber Optic. We know that Australia has been showing a great interest in this project already. It will be the only cable that is connecting the aggregated data flow between America and Asia, which is a great thing. Chilean government will have will invest here in equity. The tenders for the consortiums will be at the end of this year, and the tenders for construction and operation will be next year. And the next slide, last but not least, the food sector. Is driven by very strong fundamentals. Everybody knows that, and we, especially in times of crises and trade wars like this one, Chile is recognized as a global food producer and exporter, in particular for the quality and the food security. The e-commerce sales have doubled in these days, and this is led by the food sector. Our supply chain haven't stopped in Chile. In particular, the imports and exports, as I mentioned, and the minister was telling us, we have a very strong network of FTAs with about 5 billion consumers that we can reach with very preferential tariffs. The opportunities here will be related to all sorts of technologies and infrastructure to water management, given the crisis that we have in Chile, and food tech. That is the new future for Chile in terms of food. In the next slide, for those that are interested to know more about the measures that the Chilean government has been taking related to the pandemic, we just elaborated a compendium that is covering all topics related to labor law, emergency economic packages, or tax reforms, everything. So you can download it from our website, www.investchile.gov.cl, or just let us know and we will send it to you. And I would like to finish in the next slide by telling you that how InvestChile is helping and can help today. We have adjusted our ways of doing things and helping companies to the new circumstances. This year we're doing remote meetings with companies, in some cases with round tables with companies, and some cases even larger than that. We will be doing what's called virtual missions. We're putting, as I mentioned before, a strong emphasis and focus on foreign companies established in Chile already. As you can see, we in the last slide, we're doing reports about a contingency and new measures. So in our website, you will be permanently finding pieces of information that we believe could be very interesting today. We continue to connect companies to the authorities they need to move ahead and to solve issues related to the projects. So in other words, we can assist you with all you need to invest in Chile. We're fully active, remotely, but fully active. And then my last slide, I just wanted to recap with, in summary, to say that in the middle of all this uncertainty, we want to be optimistic by saying that Chile has been for decades a great destiny for foreign investment, that we continue to have strong fundamentals and some sectors are reflecting so. We play a role as a hub for the region in some sectors. The government is taking all sorts of emergency measures and maintaining our country open for FDI. And at InvestChile, we are keen to help you anytime. So many thanks for your time, and you have our contact details.
Thank you very much, Ian. Our next speaker is the Australian Ambassador to Chile, Todd Mercer. Todd, if I can hand over to you.
Thanks, Jose. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the introduction and the invitation to participate in the panel. We've known one another for quite a few years. I've spent probably about half of my time in the Foreign Service working on Latin America issues, having been posted to Mexico and now twice to Chile. So I look forward to our paths crossing again many times over the next few years.
Likewise.
And I'd just like to acknowledge the important role that ALABC plays in promoting and raising the profile of Latin America in Australia. It's still for us, having worked on the region for 25 years or so, I tire a little bit of hearing about it being an emerging market. I think we have very well-established links, but there's a lot more potential. I'm very conscious of the limit of time, and Vice Minister Yáñez has done me a favour by touching on a number of the points that I wanted to refer to. And I think that's because, as he said, we are very much like-minded when it comes to trade and investment policy. We, at the moment, as he referred to, we jointly signed off on a statement about the importance of keeping supply chains open. It's more important than it's ever been to guard against the temptation of protectionism, and that's something where we are very much on the same page. We also, like Chile, we're very keen to diversify our markets, and that's something that we're working very hard to do. We're also focused on upgrading or modernising our free trade agreements, and there's a number of processes underway at the moment. We also have a need to engage with civil society, and we are working to become more transparent around the way we approach trade. We face a similar challenge to Chile in that when times are tough, and times are particularly tough right now, people start to question the benefits of trading, and it's very important that we get out there and we advocate for the benefits of open markets. So I previously served in Chile and know the country quite well. I've got family connections here through my wife. I've had a number of opportunities to work with Chile on a couple of trade negotiations. I was a member of the team that negotiated our bilateral free trade agreement. I also participated in the TPP negotiations in the first couple of years, and that for me reinforced just how much Chile and Australia share when it comes to our approach to trade. Now, it won't surprise anybody to hear that this isn't the start to my posting that I'd hoped for or expected. So it's been a particularly challenging time for everybody globally. But it's also placed some limits on just how much I've been able to do my introductory calls and to get out there and meet people. You know, fortunately, in that month or so when I was able to make my introductory calls, I was able to call on Vice Minister Yáñez and a number of other ministers. I was also able to meet with some of the big Australian companies here, BHP, Orica, GHD, and also with some Chilean companies that have interests in Australia, such as SQM. So in the 15 years or so that I've been away, I've been really impressed at just how that commercial relationship has grown, to see Chilean companies investing in Australia and to now see more than 200 Australian companies with a presence here. I should just make one comment about COVID-19 and how Chile has responded. Again, really encouraged and impressed with the way that the government has responded. I arrived in early February, and really from that time, you could see that the Chilean government was aware and acted early. It's taken the challenge very seriously. It's been very transparent. All of us are watching on a daily basis the updates provided by the health minister and his subsecretarios. So we feel informed, and Chile, in a regional context, is doing very well. And you can see in the number of tests that they're conducting that's really encouraging. In terms of my contact with Australian business, so I've had a limited number of meetings here, but before I left Australia in my pre-posting consultations, the one takeaway message I took from those meetings has been the commitment of these companies to Chile as a market. Many of them, such as BHP, have been here for decades, and the number of companies, Australian companies here, has grown on the back of a very positive experience. So really encouraged to hear that. But it's not just our businesses. The other thing that I've noticed has changed here is the other Australian players that are present in the market. So to have the government of Victoria, the state of Victoria and the government of the state of Queensland establish their regional presence here in Santiago reinforces that thing that many of us have talked about over the years of Chile being the gateway to Latin America for Australia and Australia being the gateway to Asia for Chile. We also have a number of Australian universities that now have a presence here. And you just need to look at the University of Queensland and its Sustainable Minerals Institute, which is making a real difference and has been a real plus in the relationship. And I can't go without mentioning the CSIRO. Having them here now for 3 or 4 years has been a real shot in the arm for the relationship. Just on the trade and investment front, much of what I wanted to say, Vice Minister Yáñez has covered off. There was another statement, another joint statement that Australia and Chile, along with 41 other WTO members, signed off on yesterday. And that was, as the friends of the system, essentially reaffirming our support for the WTO, a fundamental institution for countries like Australia and Chile that depend on trade. And depend on a rules-based system to regulate that trade. There was also the other statement around supply chains that the Vice Minister mentioned. In terms of bilaterally, we have a modern, high-quality, comprehensive free trade agreement that's been in place since 2009. We're currently one of the countries negotiating with the Pacific Alliance, and that's an agreement we would like to try and progress this year. And I might just leave with one final note that we saw the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement enter into force a year ago. We're very much looking forward to Chile ratifying that agreement. We think it's really important. We see it as a very important part of the Asia-Pacific economic architecture. And the 4 countries that can take a lot of credit for the TPP getting off the ground are those that form the P4, so Chile, New Zealand, Singapore and Brunei. So we really would like to see Chile come on board as soon as possible. Again, conscious of the time, I might leave it at that, and I'd be happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Todd. If I can now call on Ben White, the Operations Manager for the Pacific for GHD, to provide a private sector overview of how he and his company see the situation. So, Ben, over to you.
Yeah, good morning. Buenas noches, and thank you for the opportunity. Reinforce the Ambassador's remarks about government support, ALABC, AusCham and others. That sort of support is so important. I'll make my comments brief just due to time. So next slide, please. Just in terms of context, who GHD is, we are a global professional services company operating in the global markets of water, energy and resources, environment, property and buildings, and transportation. Providing engineering, architecture, environmental and construction services to private and public clients. We've been around since 1928, grew out of Australia and have gone global since. We are still privately owned by our employees, and our employee numbers now are about 10,000 across 5 continents and the Pacific region. So that's just GHD at a glance. Next slide, please. GHD in Chile, you'll notice the photo there with Ambassador Mercer and Trade Commissioner Gabrielle with our leadership team in Santiago earlier this year. That's one of the visits that the Ambassador got out to before COVID. So GHD has been in Chile since 2001. Our Chilean office is part of our Asia Pacific group, which includes our offices in New Zealand, the Philippines, Chile, China, and Fiji, as well as a couple of us based here in Australia. So it just goes to reinforce the comments from the previous speakers about the importance of the broader Pacific community. And as we move out of the COVID environment, that Pacific community will be even more important to trade, security, and of course the growth of our communities. Today in Chile, GHD has over 100 engineering and professional staff, mostly located in our offices in Santiago. Most of those are Chilean. We only have a couple of expatriates in Santiago at the moment. And being an employee-owned company, a number of those Chileans, particularly leadership and senior staff, are personally invested in the success of our business. So that adds that strong connection to Chile, its people and communities. Our major clients in Chile include Anglo American, BHP, Codelco and EFE, the Chile State Rail Company, amongst others. And our recent projects include non-process mining infrastructure, rail bridges, water security, desalination, environmental impact studies, monitoring and permitting, and ports and coastal work. Next slide, please. In relation to COVID, we as a global company conduct strategic planning on a regular basis. As it happened last year, we actually gamed some scenarios which included some of the impacts of COVID-19. We probably didn't predict a pandemic, but some of the impacts that we gamed were similar. So we were somewhat prepared for what occurred, particularly in Chile. So our mitigation measures, beyond those normal cleaning and sanitation type measures that we're all undergoing at the moment, we activated our global crisis management team, which sits at the highest level of our organisation and is chaired by the CEO. So that manages our response. Once the pandemic became pretty serious, we moved to remote working. quickly. And in Chile, we already had our staff and IT systems prepared. So within a few days, the entire office was working remotely and still are. We moved quickly not only for the safety of our staff and our clients, but also to limit the movement of our people around the community. We didn't want to be we didn't want to transfer COVID around the community as well, being good corporate citizens. The other mitigation is we've maintained strong connections with our global business, which has allowed a collective management of our response. So there's been a strong sharing of lessons and ideas between countries, our offices in different countries. And in particular, our office in Chile has had a lead there because they were so well prepared and have shared a lot of lessons about remote working to our other global staff who may not have been as well prepared. Secondly, we've been able to move or share work packages between our offices around the world as lockdowns and staff availability became an issue. In Chile's case, we've been able to support our North American offices to deliver work for their clients using staff in Chile working remotely. So that's been an excellent outcome and another reason why it's important to have these offices around the world. We've been able to maintain a largely seamless support of our existing clients and projects. Part of the reason that has been a success also is because our clients, and I mentioned some of them, their major projects have continued during this period. So that's been a potential impact mitigation for us as well. So the business has continued. Next slide, please. Just looking into the future, Chile is key to GHC's global footprint and our ability to support clients where they need it. As an example, we have strong relationships with international clients like BHP in Australia. So we've also committed to supporting them in Chile and North America. We also have, as I mentioned, a very capable technical talent pool in Chile who are able to support these international clients in other regions. COVID in particular has reinforced to all of us what's possible using technology and greater levels of collaboration. We're also firmly committed to supporting our local clients like Codelco and EFE. These clients in Chile are nationally important, particularly to the economic recovery. So we see a key role for our Chile office and our company to contribute to that recovery. However, we do recognise that it's still early days and much of the analysis around the pandemic and how it will be controlled and how it will progress is still very early. Our understanding of the economic impacts and the data available is still pretty rough at this point. So it's important that we continue to do forums like this, that we collectively use the best available data and analysis to underpin our collective strategic decisions. So what's that look like for GHC in Chile? We'll return to the office on Monday, as long as official guidance remains so. So that's not all of our staff, that's a portion of our staff, and we're putting in place the right protocols to make sure that that's safe to do so, and that we maintain a level of resilience amongst our operations. So not everyone in the office at the same time. Should there be another outbreak, we don't want to risk our capability or risk further damage to the community. And in the meantime, our strategic planning will continue based on data and forecasts, etc., as they come forward. So I hope that helps understand how we as a company have responded. We intend to be available to our clients to respond to the situation and help them respond. And certainly, if you'd like more information, please reach out directly or via ALABC or Austrade or the ambassadors. They know how to get in touch with us as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. And our next panelist is the Austrade Trade Commissioner in Chile, Gabrielle Hall. So Gabrielle, if I could hand over to you.
Gracias, Jose. Hi, everyone. So I will keep this super quick. Just wanted to share a few trends and opportunities that I'm seeing on the ground in Santiago. So in terms of trends, of course, the majority of Australian business here in Chile is in the MET sector. And having spoken to a lot of them, what we're really hearing, and I just wanted to reinforce today, is despite facing challenges around delayed payments, frozen contracts, etc., the overall sentiment is to very much weather this storm and reinforce their commitment to the Chilean market. A lot of them also have really shifted their business models from sales to support, and really putting their relationships first to lay the foundations for the bounce back. I think for future opportunities, though, which is sort of the exciting part, the crystal ball that no one really knows what's going to happen. But building on a little bit from what Ian was saying before, we see some opportunities in some of those key established sectors where Australia already has a presence and reputation. Of course, mining being the main one. So looking at mining at 4.0, things like automation, digital transformation, that present not only an opportunity from a technological point of view, but also in terms of knowledge transfer through skills and training in new areas. So this is something that our office here has been looking at, and something that will be accelerated through this through the post-COVID recovery. Of course, infrastructure. So Austrade was very pleased to see the $2 billion budget approved for Chile's state-owned railway company EFE that Ben just mentioned, presenting a really healthy forward pipeline of rail projects through to 2022 that all have quite a significant tech focus. Again, quite interesting for Australian exporters. In terms of new and emerging sectors, Austrade's quite interested in seeing how some of these global trends that are being accelerated by COVID, how they're going to manifest themselves in Chile, and what this really presents for Australia. So we're keeping an eye on the big players, the ones that are best placed to survive this, so the banks, the retailers, how are they adapting their business model to these new consumer trends, and where are they investing in? So we're looking at sort of emerging opportunities that could come out in terms of digital banking and payments, cybersecurity, e-commerce and logistics, and of course, immersive technologies. So these areas Australia has capability in these areas. However, these areas have not been explored yet in Chile, and potentially COVID is a bit of a catalyst to start doing that and changing the narrative. And again, touching on what Ian was saying before. So of course, I'm going to cut the rest out and just say that in terms of support, of course, Austrade's here. Our colleagues from the Victoria and Queensland state government offices are here too. AusCham has been done a lot of, they've been offering a lot of support for all of our businesses on the ground as well. And of course, we really value the collaboration with ALABC. And I'd sort of, just on a personal note, like Todd, I'd been here for a few short weeks before this all happened. So really open and willing to hear from the businesses and better understand your experience and your plans and what more we can do to support. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. So we're running quite a bit behind time, but we do have just a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to some of the panelists. Ian, you did a presentation where you put forward the projections of some institutions, including the World Bank, and it seemed to suggest very much a V recovery. Is that a realistic assessment given the likely depth of the economic impact of COVID-19?
Very good question. I think that half of economists in the world are trying to figure it out, and probably not. I think that for what we have seen, the most opinions go in line with more of a W form or shape of recovery, which would mean that yes, in this next quarter we will have some sort of recovery in quarter 3 or 4, but the fourth quarter, when Europe is going and North Hemisphere is going into winter, it might be again a bit of a slope down. So everyone is thinking that it will be more slowly and more of a W shape with a little slowdown in the fourth quarter, and then retaking again during 2021. But that's more realistic.
Okay. If we still have Vice Minister Yáñez with us, I wanted to ask, Chile remains committed very much to free trade, is against any increase in protectionist measures, but do you see that one of the possible impacts of COVID is a slowdown in the evolution of alliances such as the Pacific Alliance and the possibility of any increased engagement between Pacific Alliance members and Mercosur members?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a real situation in terms of whether countries head towards more protectionism or not. In the case of the Pacific Alliance, it has not been the case. Some of our partners have established very restricted and limited export restrictions with some medical supplies. That's the case with Peru and Colombia. But we had high-level meetings in the context of COVID-19 for further cooperation, to also expand the trade policy. As part of that, indeed, we, the Global Supply Chains Group, or the Regional Supply Chains Group, has already exchanged and defined a list of products that are first or highly demanded in this crisis, to see how we can build a value chain and start producing products in the context of this crisis. And other initiatives that are trade oriented, and that, at least from my perspective, also holding the pro tempore presidency of it, I see with a lot of optimism. Negotiations are complicated. I have to admit that we have not seen a pace of advance as fast as I wish to see when we talk about the negotiation with the 4 associated members. There have been, changes in governments over time, in particular last year, that has also been troublesome when it comes to reshape and redefine the focus of the negotiation. But I keep my optimism in that process as well. I think in the next few weeks, we will see a resume of that, I hope more vigorously. But when it comes to Mercosur, I think I'm more cautious, because the announce of Argentina to withdraw negotiations in the future, trade negotiations is something that certainly, when we look from the Pacific Alliance, when thinking back in the statement that our leaders made in Puerto Vallarta, talking about a broader free trade zone, that's the thing, it will keep remaining as a long-term goal. And we hope to work further on the technical barriers issue, more sanitary and phytosanitary aspects. And we have set a mechanism which is new, but I don't see the 2 blocks merging or advancing in a way that goes faster than that.
Okay. Hey, could I just ask, one of the questions that a lot of business people have uppermost in their mind is that of resumption of international travel. If you look at your crystal ball, do you have any estimate as to when it's likely to be that some of the current travel restrictions will be relaxed?
No, not yet, but we're preparing for that. So one of the projects that we have is to have a common sort of COVID ID or badge to circulate within the 4 Pacific Alliance member countries. We're talking with the EU and what they're doing. But so far, we do not see a lifting of that. We know that some companies are resuming flights from June, but so far the government has not yet lifted, and the other governments in regions, in particular Colombia and Mexico, are keeping that side very restricted.
Thank you very much. I'm very conscious that we have gone well over time. So if any questions remain unanswered, we will ask the Business Council to try and obtain responses from the appropriate panelists and to respond to those questions. If I could just call now upon Ambassador Patricio Powell, Chile's ambassador to Australia, to make a short closing remark. Ambassador, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Good morning to everyone. Very, very briefly, I think it's interesting to remember that we're commemorating 75 years of formal Chilean-Australian relations. And I don't think anybody was able to predict that it would be done under these circumstances, the level of disruption, the level of challenge. But also there is opportunity, again, in these times for showing how strong, how reliable, how adaptable, and how extended our links are. And that is something to keep in mind. During the last 2 months, you know, and it's shown in part of this conversation, the value of trust and collaboration has been underscored to an incredible level, you know, for relations domestic and internationally, and particularly internationally. Chile and Australia believe in open, transparent, and rule-based interactions. And our countries have been and will continue being active in promoting openness and interactions at a time when most likely, and this has been mentioned here, there may be some more, and even more than some, resistance. Now, with the base that we have, the solid base that we have in our links between our two nations, it is not adventurous to think that pretty much every aspect of our relation between Chile and Australia will not remain exactly the same just because circumstances have been disrupted so much. Now, these circumstances range from people-to-people links, migration, education, air transport, investment, innovation, so on and so forth. We are ready and available to make the best of them, and I think that, again, the statements that have been provided today, the comments that have been provided to that, are witness to that persistence on what our countries have been doing together well for decades, and the necessary adaptability for the new circumstances. I've been asked to express thanks to our panelists today, to Vice Minister Yáñez, to Ambassador Mercer, to Frederick, to Ben White, to Gabrielle Hall, obviously to our fantastic moderator today, Jose Blanco, to ALABC for 30 years of fostering and facilitating economic links between Latin America and Australia, and of course to the audience and participants today, many of whom are actually building every day those links of progress. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Powell, and all the panelists, and to all those of you who are continuing to listen to the presentation. As I mentioned at the commencement, it has been taped and will be available on the ALABC webpage if you'd like to share it with any of your friends and contacts. So thank you very, very much, and until the next webinar hosted by the ALABC. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.